Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices hosted by World Information Transfer and focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Our speaker today is Alex Garfin, who is a youth leader, actor, and musician, widely known for his roles as Jordan Kent on Superman and Louis Linus Van Pelt in the Peanuts movie. Since gaining success in acting, Garfin has made strides as a thought leader representing his generation and artists globally. At age 18, he brokered the deal between the New York Mets and Sing for Hope and received the title of their first youth ambassador. He represented his generation and viewpoints to world and youth leaders, collaborating with the mission of Liberia on Hope's role in youth prosperity for IFRED, and is a co-chair of We the Future, a forum and Kenneth Cole bringing youth and elder attendees. He is committed to developing a new and underrepresented viewpoints to navigate through current polarization, serving youth before the future is sealed. Alex has been dedicated to understanding individuals from all socioeconomic levels and political affiliations. His role in Superman allowed him to travel to small towns worldwide, engaging with various cultures to continue his mission of opening discord and engaging people to change their minds. Over to you, Alex.
Hello, you guys. As some of you may know, I just celebrated my 20th birthday. I know a lot of us here are young. To be honest, I think we all know that it's, at least for us in America, a strange age, not because you're just between that age of being an adult and being perceived as an adult, but also because those of us that are more climate-minded, you're 20 and sometimes feel fear. Most of us, when we think of frightful ages, we think about 70, 80, or 90. However, those that can see our world clearly right now can recognize that the prospect of not living 70, 80, or 90, or at least not living well to those ages, is much more terrifying than being 70, 80, or 90. Our generation is standing on a bloody knife's edge between crisis and opportunity that we all came here to acknowledge. However, something I always like to point out, and thank you, Dr. Durbak, for that lovely introduction, seriously, is that we're not the first generation to experience this, to grow up not knowing if we were going to grow up. Fortunately, that title belongs to the baby boomers, that massive monolith of a generation that shaped the world as we see it today. It came from growing up in an era defined by constant fear of nuclear warfare. The fear then was not just that once we had the ability to destroy those around us, but all of us, humanity would be petty enough to press that button. Instead, then, we carefully learned and cemented the lesson that we are not our ideology, but of our world. It took some close calls, but as that generation grew up with the fear of not growing up to control, nuclear warfare became more and more of a manageable question. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Now we're facing multiple threats of the same magnitude and asking ourselves if we will pass this great test as well. What lies on the other end of a successful response to the AI and climate crisis is a world more unified and more advanced and more capable of listening and understanding than ever before. However, we're not battling a clear physical threat this time, but rather battling information. One of the more interesting aspects of the pandemic wasn't that the spread of the virus itself, but much more the efficient spread of the information about the virus. Ideas, after all, spread in a very similar manner to viruses, infecting someone and mutating and spreading to others. We saw information take forms of subjective waves of opinion about something as objective as a biological entity. In the end, we were not crippled by the virus as much as we were crippled by ever mutating information. This only went to show how powerful information can be when it comes to threats of global magnitude, and just how broken our information systems are. I've experienced a lot of this firsthand. Dr. Durbak actually just mentioned part of my job in being on a superhero show and repping the brand is going to Comic Cons around the world. Sometimes these take place in places that normally people wouldn't think to visit. A lot of times this means places where generally people have viewpoints they disagree with, being that I come from the American coast. What I was shocked by was just how well people educate themselves everywhere. And, this is not just true in small town America, but it's also true in small town Europe. I haven't been too deep into Asia, except I actually spent part of my growing up in Japan, and I know it's true there. So I can only assume that it's everywhere as well, that at least has access to the internet and public facilities, that people can educate themselves. What I have noticed, though, is that many of our institutions thus far have only dealt with the problems of underabundance of information. Even the First Amendment here in the United States was written to protect the citizens from the problems arising from an underabundance of information. Back then, and for most of history, being informed and being perceived as educated were nearly synonymous. Now, one can be incredibly informed while still woefully uneducated as to the state of the world. This applies to people across the political spectrum of all places. How we deal with this newfound incredible wealth of information is an open question. But I believe I know where we can start, at least where I've started, by talking to each other, hearing each other out. I've spoken many times about the generational divide and how it's brought to us by a rapidly changing world. In this vein, our generations all get information from very different sources. We cannot even begin to understand how much that divides us. It takes our fight for climate reform from one where we can all stand against exploitation and makes us fight with each other. How can we not see that with a generational issue, the most destructive and dangerous thing we can do is divide ourselves on generational lines? People with different viewpoints and those in other generations are not our enemy. That's what the people truly at fault for climate change want us to think. So I encourage all of us to have new discussions with people outside our comfort zones. Ones where we're willing to listen and learn about their experience and the information that they were fed as much as we are wanting to deliver the information that we were fed. This is too urgent an issue to squabble about. And it's time we treat each other with respect and unite to pass this greatest of tests that humanity has ever faced. At least that's the way that I perceive it. So I ask those of you in the boomer generations and the ones preceding and following to see themselves in mine. People that are afraid of their future just like you were, but ready to build a world with your help that has never been seen before. Give us a chance. I know we'll take it in stride. History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And I think it's time to see that your generation and mine are a couplet. On the flip side, I ask those of you in my generation to remain active. Keep pushing for the future we know we deserve and do it in a way that's constructive and meaningful. We were, from how I see it, given the task of supreme cooperation. We are all here feeling this ticking clock. Therefore, I urge respect and willingness to work with people outside of your comfort zone to get this task done in time. To take care of our environment and to prime our institutions to take on the future and not be relics of the past, as they so often can be. We need to use the cooperation, compassion, and concern that has come to define our generation. For it is those that are the hidden powers of us Zoomers. Change generations. I just think that, especially, I think that we are known for being this monolith just as the baby boomers were. We could absolutely use it in the same way. Dr. Durbak?
Well, I agree with everything that you have said, Alex. I think that what you spoke is very pertinent and relevant, not only to the young people, which you so eloquently represent, but to all the people that make decisions for what is going on. And I think that it is very important that the messages that you distribute and messages that you are involved with get to the right people and that they can listen to it. That's why we have these webinars, so that in a short period of time, people can learn. But it's one thing that's very, very important. We need to learn how to cooperate with each other. We need to learn how to respect another person. And that does not mean that we do not say anything. Being politically correct and keeping everything what you feel inside and not using it to change futures is completely contradictory to what America was built on. It was built on freedom of speech and freedom of work and freedom of participating. And we do not have that right now. So this is where it is very important. And I'm very glad that you are focusing on it. And now we should move over to Susie.
Hello, Susie.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
Our
you.
first question here is, what do you think about the psychology of Zoomers? Do you think that the Zoomer generation has more psychological disorders and is not stress resistant?
I think having psychological disorders and being stress resistant, I think those are two separate issues. I think, in fact, one who has, and I'm sure actually Dr. Durbak could speak more about this than I, considering she's an expert, but I believe one that has certain mental disorders may not mean that they're more or less stress resistant. As for the collective psychology of the Zoomer generation, I honestly think that sometimes there's a bit of a misnomer there as well. We're often seen as this big block, when I've realized in all of my travels and all of the people that I've spoken to that have just as much of a diversity of opinion as the generations before and after. We're just more in touch with one another. We communicate on a different level. We grew up with cell phones around us, and those of us, I mean, at least around my age, as I mentioned, I'm 20. We got our cell phones, I guess, when we were around 15, 14. We've had a lot of our development being interconnected. So as for a group psychology, I do think that we're more easily spear pointed. However, I do think there's a diversity of opinion across all of generations. And that's something we need to acknowledge as well. You know, when we look at trying to sum up an entire generation's viewpoints, a lot of times we'll go to social media, where a lot of times the most extreme viewpoints will be put at the forefront. Having institutions where we can represent underrepresented opinions in a manner that's safe, or at least a culture that's accepting of other people's opinions enough that if they are misinformed, we educate rather than ostracize, is all the more important.
In your opinion, in which professions do you think Zoomers can best realize their potential?
Oh, all of them. I mean, like, in which professions? I mean, you can look at the economy, look at which way it's heading, and I understand the tenor of the question in that our generation has generally had a shifting roadmap, you know, and I speak about this as well, but you look past pre-industrial societies, and generally their parents lived in a very similar world as their grandparents and so on and so forth. So as people aged, they gained wisdom. Now we're constantly having an overhauling of our global societies on a basic technological level. And the roadmap changes for my generation often. We don't know what direction we need to set ourselves on, but all of the occupations that are provided to us require an incredible amount of specificity. So as for what generations, what my generation may or may not go into work with, I think that question remains very scarily open. We don't know how many of our jobs are going to be automated. Even those of us in the arts, right? And that's my main job. I'm an actor, which is a highly sought after job. And I recognize that I stand on a mountain of preparation, but also luck to get here. We're in danger. It's part of the reason that we're striking. We never thought our jobs could be automated. Now we're seeing that they can by AI. So I wish I had better advice, except the fact that we may need to look very critically at our institutions of reward, and how in our society that we're programmed to function in a way that contributes to society in a monetary way, and our value is assessed that way. And we may need to take a critical look at that as more and more of our jobs get automated, even the intellectual ones.
What new opportunities have you had since you started your film career?
Oh man, every single one. You know, a lot of people ask, well, what's the experience since joining Superman? I say it's not an experience, it's a lifestyle change. I mean, not only financially, but also socially. Also, my thinking systems have been drastically altered. I spent most of my life growing up here in New York City, except for that brief stint in Japan. And I was not exposed to people from other places. Getting to connect with people on a human level absolutely changed my mindset. So yeah, it's not just an experience, it's a lifestyle shift.
You encountered any ageism, age discrimination, or anything in your diplomatic career?
Yes, but I think it's often how you respond to it that really decides whether or not it's going to affect you. People it's very rare that people will be blatantly just saying you're too young to be in this space or that space. I think most people that are educated acknowledge the fact that due to the fact that industrialization is moving faster and faster and faster, all of our generations ended up with such different levels of expertise in different things. You know, it's quite an old-fashioned notion that the young people know less than the old people about everything. Now it seems that this notion's turned on its head, and it's actually causing a lot of stress and agita in the older generation that they may not understand some of the stuff coming out now because things are moving so fast and they've had so many more years of experience doing certain tasks that are becoming more and more antiquated. So I think when it comes to ageism, it just takes an acknowledgement that all different ages have different levels of expertise in different things. And that's an uncomfortable and almost paradoxical concept. But I think we're all experiencing it constantly.
What are the biggest problems or inconveniences you've experienced in your work as either a diplomat or an actor?
Biggest problems or inconveniences? That's a great question. Well, I mean, if we're talking on a personal level, I guess, I live my life in many different places now, as an actor or as a diplomat. And I'm constantly shifting around the globe or at least the country. So that old adage of a rolling stone gathers no moss. At times you do feel that way, but at other times you're very lucky and you feel very lucky that maybe you don't have moss and that you still get to glide around for a little longer. I suppose there's always time to gather moths later.
Had any funny moments at castings that you'd be willing to share?
Sure. I love this. Okay, here's one. So I was a child actor. I kind of had a renaissance in my acting career when I was 15, as I kind of decided to go down that path rather than probably a little more of an intellectual path, or I really wanted to become a scientist for a long time. But this is when I was a child actor. We are on the old style casting hall. They don't do it anymore. It all got automated. Another example of an absolutely changing field. All in an old style casting hall, sitting next to each other, all those little kids and, whatever parent or guardian came with us. And, we wait for like 3 hours for this audition for a Ford commercial, I want to say it was. And they go down the line. Have you played lacrosse? Have you played lacrosse? And I'm seeing these kids get turned away as they're saying no. So, I'm starting to get the right answer. Yes, I play lacrosse. That's the captain of the team. Okay, great. Come on in. Of course, there's a lacrosse stick. I don't even know what it's called, a lacrosse stick, and a ball sitting there. Oh, shoot. I'm like 10 years old. I'm like, oh, no. I barely played any sports growing up, to be honest. I was a theater kid. I was a music kid. Not really any sports. So they threw the ball and they just said, just catch it and say the line. They threw it in such an easy way. And my little butt, I didn't know anything. So I swung it like a baseball bat and the thing, home run. You don't want a home run in lacrosse, especially in a small room with a big, expensive camera in the middle. This is still at the time when cameras were they're definitely more of a piece of technology than a household item. Bouncing around, the balls bouncing around the room. They're looking at each other, panicked. They look at each other. Okay, take a breath. We're gonna put the ball on the ground. Here, scoop it up. Catch the ball. Okay, perfect. I can do that. Scoop it up, bing, right in the ceiling, and then they go, okay, you've never played lacrosse in your life, have you? And I go, no, I haven't. Okay, goodbye. Forgot about that story. It's been a while.
Dream role that you would like to play?
Oh yeah, I think as an actor, you're always looking around at people and taking inspiration from them. Humans are so complex, especially their mannerisms, the way that their brain ends up producing these certain actions in the physical realm. So you always try to estimate by seeing people around you and trying to come up from the other side of understanding, right? You're going from the top and the bottom is the way I see it. Hopefully you meet in the middle through enough digging of both. In that regard, in terms of like characters that people would know, I've always wanted to play Beethoven. I'm a piano player myself. I think his story defines the entire Romantic era, at least in that part of Europe. The idea of someone just being angry enough to change all of music, which is my joke about it. It's not that clear cut, is pretty incredible. And also, I got hair for it, right? So
If you didn't have an acting career, where would you express yourself? Like, are there other outlets or areas that interest you?
well, I express myself a lot in talking to people, building relationships. I think relationships are an expression of each other and they create something new as well. Um, I would express myself in music. I love music. I have 154 songs written now. I'm thinking about maybe releasing them, although they usually are just for me and my friends or people that would listen. They're quite an intimate thing. But mainly, I think, yeah, my self-expression, besides music and artistic expression, yeah, I would say this: talking to people, engaging with people, trying to be the change I want to see in the world, or at least alter the dialogue enough that I think that what is already incredible can become more efficient, which is generally what I talk about. These incredible social movements, how can they become more efficient, and how can they become more all-encompassing?
What genres of films do you plan to act in next?
I really want to start diving into comedy a little more as well, although I really want to do some historical drama, like I said, Beethoven. The thing about the genres, I don't believe the genre is as important as the character, at least from an actor's perspective. I mean, unless you're doing a dramatic genre shift between like comedy and like noir, like there are certain, when the genre starts to affect the characters when the actor cares. Otherwise, I don't believe the genre has that much of an effect on the actor's performance. You're just trying to live through that character.
You highlight what you believe to be one of the main features of the Zoomer generation.
Yeah, I think our interconnectivity is a huge highlight of the Zoomer generation. I believe that due to that interconnectivity, from being completely technologically fluent from a young age, I think the same way as a language, you become fluent after a certain age, although I guess that's interesting research now, it's actually in debate. I think we are technologically fluent in general as a generation. I think that allowed an interconnectivity that you haven't seen in previous generations at all. I spoke about the boomer generation. They were quite interconnected as well through big social changes. I take this look at American history. This is my own opinion, by the way. This is not something I generally put out there, but I do take this look at recent American history in terms of pop culture. Right? I'm working pop culture. I'm American, so it makes sense. And I also love old music. And I look at the 50s and that nuclear household and those very strict ideals that they had that oftentimes really cut people out of the fold, that we all can kind of look back at them and criticize today. It almost felt like someone was baby-proofing everything in some ways. Baby-proofing from one perspective, by the way, and that would be a very Anglo-Saxon American perspective, but very baby-proofed. I would like to point out that the baby boomers were babies during this time. Everyone was having a baby. The economy was shifting towards a baby. Everyone was voting like they had a baby. All of a sudden, the culture shifted around it. You look into the 60s and the 70s, they're teenagers, and what a teenager era, at least in terms of of movements in culture. You know, you look towards the 80s when they're going into their 40s and 30s and looking at their finances, and there's a lot of very lax financial laws at the time. You know, the Reaganites are all out there, and looking to the 90s, and all of a sudden it comes about, I think, caring about children again. I think there's a bit of a transitional period, but you can certainly see the baby boomers grow and develop, and now even there's so many institutions that are trying to trying to provide for the baby boomers as they get into older age. I think generally it's because they voted as a bloc because they were such a large generation. Classical economic theory would say that being part of a smaller generation would bring you more opportunities, but I think that's being cast into a little bit of doubt lately. I think my generation could be very much the same, and that's why I wanted to show them akin as much as possible. Not only in the fact that we're both kind of growing up in this, we both grew up in this era of not knowing if we're going to get a world to grow up in, but also because we became monoliths in our own ways, or I hope mine does as well.
How has growing up in a digitally connected world influence the social and communication skills of the Zoomer generation? And based on that, what should education look like for Zoomers? Just knowing how they've grown up in this interconnected world that you mentioned.
I think that, and those are two great questions, by the way. I'll tackle one and then the other. And I'll also put the big disclaimer that I'm not an expert in education. I'm just someone that grew up in the education system and at times contributed to it myself. Actually, I ended up teaching class in high school. Okay, so when it comes to the interconnectivity of my generation, I think that also spills into our social skills. We are a social generation, certainly, but also, again, you can't look at it as a monolith. There are so many different cultures around the world that are all around my age. So if you talk to someone from Nigeria around my age, they're going to have a very different perspective on their generation than mine. You could even use the microcosm of North Korea, obviously a culture that is unequivocally different than the rest of the West. But if we are talking about the general experience that I've had and the people that I've spoken to, yeah, we base a lot of our social skills and a lot of our social status based on social media, which is also a dangerous prospect when you really look at it critically, because those are large corporations telling us exactly what we should think about each other, who has status and who doesn't. Sometimes those corporations, as was pointed out over and over again, are endemic to other countries, and like TikTok being from China. So I think there is a danger there. However, with every single unique disadvantage, I've lived by this my whole life, there is a unique advantage. And that being, yes, we take our social status in a lot of ways. And again, not all of us, but if you are generalizing and blurring your eyes, social status in a lot of ways from social media. We also become educated, or more educated than ever before. So I think that bleeds into the education question. I noticed that the teachers that were most successful in teaching me knew that the internet was an unbelievable resource to gather opinions from all across the world. You know, you used to have to go to a library and read through a book. It was quite labor intensive to get one nugget of information that you wanted. Now you can Google, right? That goes back to that overabundance versus underabundance of information and how we can structure our laws to adjust for that and keep everyone stable. My favorite educators, and I had one that to this day remains my favorite teacher from all my years of schooling. No offense to the others, but my 8th grade science teacher, Mr. Winterfield, he actively engaged with his students in a non-patronizing way. First of all, and that's another thing I always want to champion is not patronizing people when you're trying to teach them something. It's a delicate line to walk, but it's a necessary one. And if you disregard it, you're going to ostracize people and have them not learn a thing at all. But more than that, he understood that all he needed to do was inspire us to keep learning. He didn't try to feed us fish every day. He all gave us a rod and he taught us how to fish. Part of learning how to fish is disseminating between disinformation and real information, finding correct sources. which I don't believe is talked about enough, at least in the American schools. I can't speak to other places. So when it comes to educating Zoomers, I really do think, first and foremost, it's about encouraging them to educate themselves. And I think the rest will follow.
What important changes can Zoomers bring to society? And can you provide examples of how Zoomers are leveraging their ability to challenge traditional norms today?
Yeah, although it's an interesting question on a couple cases, and I know I've been doing this a lot. I don't mean to be evasive, but how can Zoomers contribute to society? I think Zoomers are society. Their mere being is contribution. Society is simply this strange nebulous term we use to describe the organization of people. The Zoomers are the people at different stages of our lives as our generation. Granted that we get a world to succeed in, which is an open question that we need to attack now. And I think it's also why my generation is so on it with the activism. It's because we're looking at our future and going, oh my God, I don't know if I'll get the future. But in terms of how they're going to contribute to society, I think that's going to change as they grow. We're obviously looking at it right now, and what comes to mind is climate reform, and social justice as well in some parts of the world as well. And also climate reform is universal as well, which I also point out to people. But again, that's what I mean. It's a strange question in that we are going to be this society. We already are a part of the society. How we may or may not contribute is going to change as to our role in it. And I forget the second question. I'm sorry.
Can you provide examples of how Zoomers are leveraging their ability to challenge traditional norms today?
Oh, well, that one's definitely more of a pointy question in that you can totally see that we're using that monolith that I was talking about, that interconnectivity, and we're using it to try to inspire others to join our social movements and shape culture. So much of culture is now directed towards my generation. I think in part because we're one big market, if you want to look at it that way, but we're also one big voting group, if you want to look at it that way. I think one of the most important parts of a generation getting what they want is having them all go to the polls, which my generation is constantly advocating for. So I think there's a million concrete examples you can use as to how we're trying to challenge social norms. Although I would love to remind everyone that these social norms are not norms just yet. I mean, at least in the sense of broad historical thinking that I think through. And again, I'm not an expert, just an advocate, or I'm very much I'm a nerd. I'm a nerd. When we think about norms, a lot of these things are not going back hundreds or thousands of years. Some of them are, but a lot of them are quite new because the world has been changing for so long. People, I think one of the pitfalls of human civilization is that, really getting general here, but we don't remember our very recent past. 100 years ago, in terms of broader civilization, is not that long, but only the oldest of us would remember anything about 100 years ago firsthand, what that society looked like. Society's constantly been in a state of flux. I think Hegel could probably tell you something about that better than I could. I guess he's dead. But so yeah, we're challenging social norms, but I believe that's the role of every generation to critically ask their place in the world and to look at the generation behind them. And that is until we stop changing, which I don't believe is in sight at all. Who knows? They say progress goes on a sigmoid curve for those of us that like math. And I'd say in terms of societal progress, right here was industrialization. It took a couple hundred years, and whoa, from like the beginning of the steam engine, I guess it was not that couple hundred years, but whoa, is it going to do this? Who knows? Yeah.
Tap into the capabilities of Zoomers and work collaboratively with them to drive innovation and progress.
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that question.
How can older generations tap into the capabilities of Zoomers and work collaboratively with them to drive innovation and progress?
Number one is do not patronize those around you. My generation prides itself, at least again, if you're looking at it with your blurry eyes, we pride ourselves on being educated because we've been able to educate ourselves so well. We've been able to get information about a various array of subjects to quite some depth through our constant being on the internet. So number one, I think, would be to not patronize those around you, and then number two would be to simply give them real power. And this is one of my things about ESG as well, and that if you're looking at it from this very bleak capitalistic mindset as well, if you're talking about how we can ensure people have a good future, the only way that we have people that are guaranteed a vested interest in the future are those that are, one, concerned about their legacy or children, or two, they're going to live in that future. So I think if we want to start really tackling the problems that my generation are going to face down the line, the ones that we need to do now is give my generation a seat at the table, and not just a seat, but the ability to act. So yeah, if you want to collaborate, I believe collaborate as equals. Recognize that due to the crazy state of the world right now, we are young, but we may have expertise that you don't. In the same way that my generation needs to acknowledge that of others, and at times it doesn't.
Mental health and well-being is one of the biggest issues that millennials face, Zoomers face. How have you observed Zoomers dealing with these challenges and the unique pressures they face in a highly digital and fast-paced world?
Yeah, well, that's also really interesting. I think there's a certain, and I love it about my generation. It's something I love. There's a certain sarcastic honesty. I think it was really epitomized in Bo Burnham's Inside. The whole world seems to be crumbling around us, and I think this is a twofold perception. That one, it really kind of is, and two, we're more aware of problems than ever. The general population is all aware of everything going on at all at the same time. And I think some of my generation, I think some of the previous generations, they had a reaction of like, shoot, there's some real problems in the world we need to fix, and we need structural reform. And I think my generation is slowly taking this new form of this sarcastic honesty, is the best way I can put it, where we want to convey a real tenor, but we understand that the world needs a certain bite to the actual vessel. So yeah, I love that about my generation.
What inspired you to become a youth ambassador for Sing for Hope and broker a deal with the New York Mets at such a young age?
Oh, I mean, what inspired me is that Sing for Hope was a huge part of my childhood. I happened to get connected with the owner of the Mets, and I just wanted to set up a meeting, see what they could do for each other. I really hoped that it would help them get some stuff done. Sing for Hope, by the way, they're this beautiful organization, beautiful. They put these pianos around New York City that are painted, and then they donate them at the end of the summer to school children. Not school children, but the schools around New York City. I've actually had the absolute pleasure of visiting these schools, at least a couple of them that are in the Sing for Hope lab. And it's just the best. It's what inspired me to become an actor, actually, was something that happened on a Sing for Hope piano. There's nothing like music that can seem to pin two unrelated people together on a deeper level. You see these communities form around these pianos, and the greatest part about it is that they put them in very accessible public places. People taking turns playing the songs they either learned in childhood or writing new songs, and one person singing, one person brings a clarinet. In New York City, I think, which honestly could even epitomize the internet as a whole. I think New York was doing it before the internet did. So interconnected and so multicultural, but also it has its own identity, but very often it's hard to find community. Sing for Hope provided that for a lot of people. So there's no question as to why I wanted to do anything for them. So then opportunity came around. I saw with the Mets, I actually included my now really dear friend at the time, I didn't know her at all, an artist, to kind of make the whole deal happen. So the artist would, and she's an athlete artist, so she paints athletes and sports teams. So she'd paint the pianos, and then they put one in Cyclones, one in Citi Field. So it was pretty cool. And yeah, it was that's a great example of people that work so well intergenerationally. I never felt I had lesser of a voice at the table at all. Enough so that it happened.
How do you balance your acting career with your advocacy work, and what motivates you to continue serving youth and promoting change for the future?
So that's the interesting thing about acting. What a lot of people I feel like don't know, especially in film, this is not as true in theater, which I also did professionally. Um, with few exceptions and few roles, most of your time is quite free. In Superman and Lois, which I can't speak about. I'm still on strike. So let me actually avoid that. But in certain TV roles, you may or may not be in every single scene. So as an actor, you're not called in every single day. It takes a long time to shoot a single scene. So generally, you get around 5 pages done in a day, depending on what the actual show. Some shows get 14 if it's all dialogue based. If it's all action that day, then sometimes you get 4/8 of a page done. We go by eighths in film. And so it's going to be a lot of days that you're not working. What are you doing with that time? I think it's also why actors have so many different special skills. You have an actor musician, you have a actor diplomat musician, I guess that's what I could be at this point. You have actors that really get into cars and really get into certain niche topics. I think it's because mainly we have so much free time. So even when you are working, it's a bit interesting. You have these brief moments of absolute unbelievable focus putting on a scene, and the rest is just quite relaxed. So for juggling my time, it's more about juggling the places. Most of the time I film the TV show I've been doing lately over in Vancouver, Canada. Quite different culturally and also locationally from New York. So dealing with the locational factor is definitely more of an issue than dealing with the time factor, although they bleed into each other.
In your role as a founding member and co-chair of We the Future, what do you see as the most pressing issues or challenges that young people need to address in the world today, and how can they do so effectively?
Okay, yeah. So I've touched on this as well, but I think if we're looking at threats of existential magnitude, climate change, and also setting up infrastructure for AI comes to mind. So in terms of climate change, that could cause a mass migration that not only would cause a massive humanitarian crisis that we've never seen the likes of before. I mean, we've never even had this many people on Earth before. 10% of all people, I believe that's a statistic. 10% of people that have ever lived are living right now. So humanitarian crisis of an unbelievable magnitude, and even it could be an economic crisis, in that there are going to be so many displaced people and so much in terms of economic damages that are very delicate global institutions. It could be tough against that kind of strain. In terms of AI, the way I see it is less of an AI is going to take everything over. I've spoken to a couple AI experts about this. The thing is that there's this fear of an intelligence explosion by some, which is if you have a model like ChatGPT, it can write its own code. If it gets smart enough, it could write a better version of itself, and that could write a better version of itself, and so on and so forth. But for most of the people that I've spoken to, and there's a couple ways that kind of get around that. One, computer would eventually have to be infinitely big, and another that there could be diminishing returns with each new generation. More I see it as an economic crisis that's going to arise from a massive amount of people out of work. Automation has already caused a lot of displaced jobs, but now I believe it's going to get to the realm where more people are going to be displaced than put to work from AI. We've already seen that actually in some places in microcosms of automation. West Virginia comes to mind. So that's a really scary prospect that a bunch of people are going to be out of work and have no means to contribute to society in that way that gets you back money. Again, I'm not an economist. I'm not an expert on this, but I think my generation would certainly feel the brunt of that. And the fact that, like I said before, we don't know what occupations we're even going to go into. We don't know what's going to be left, what's going to be there for us. Yeah. cycle of the constant progression of technological progress is leaving us absolutely bare when it comes to a roadmap. So I think those are two that we're absolutely obsessed with right now, and we should be on an existential threat. But there are so many more. I mean, you can get into the oceans, and you can get into local environment stuff, for that matter. You could get into the fact that what I spoke about, which is more or less my direction of the whole thing, is the information crisis, as I call it, because I think the information crisis is what's exacerbating the other two. We don't know what to trust, and constantly we're getting different sources of information that seem to have the same weight. We don't necessarily have institutions. I know the EU is trying to pass this law, but it's highly controversial right now when it comes to social media, and social media is giving a platform to certain credible news sources. So we need to think critically about our information systems as well. That's part of what I'm doing. Is I'm saying we have this overabundance of information. How can we get a society primed? And it's actually part of the work I'm doing now. I'm starting this new nonprofit called No to Ask. How can we get our society primed to disseminate between this overabundance of information and to start to look critically at these problems? Because I think before then we might be too disunified to really take the solitary action that we need for these kind of existential worldwide threats that we all contribute and we all reap from. So there's a couple right there. We have our work cut out for us.
What do you see the intersection of art and activism, and how can artists use their platform to create positive change and engage with important social issues?
Yeah, so that's also really interesting because I've been thinking critically about that as well lately. Obviously, being an actor, activist, if you want to put me in that bin of activists. Yeah, so one thing is that entertainers have a lot of exposure, and so you can get it out to a lot of different people, which to some people that are more close to the cause, it may be seen as performative, right? And that label can be put on it when someone doesn't actually understand the issues and they're just doing it to try to make themselves look better. I actually would also like to take another look at the fact that it doesn't really matter what the motivation is as long as the ends are there. But that's a different story, and that's definitely a much more controversial conversation. The one that I look at, the quality I look at the most when it comes to actors or any sort of artists in the activism space, is trust. A lot of actors have trust in communities that otherwise would be inaccessible. So getting an actor or getting someone who has fame to successfully implant new information into a community that's trusted by them, that could be absolutely huge and impactful. There's a danger there in that we have to make sure that these people are giving out the right messages, and who knows what the right messages are. So that's a big part of the work that I'm doing now. Instead of implementing answers, implement questions. I want a society that's able to critically look at the information that they're given, and I want a society that's able to have decent conversations with one another, keep their minds open discourse, open minds. So I think that's a certain way to go about it, is the tactic of just giving them questions so that they can answer and reach their own conclusions. They get their own questions, a lot like educational systems. I think that's where actors and other famous people can do their best when it comes to activism. Unless they are a member of that one community, they want to share their voice because they have these firsthand experiences. I'm not criticizing any amount of activism. I just think that's an avenue that remains woefully unexplored in a lot of ways and could be really impactful.
In Ukraine, the older generation will say that today's youth is lost on this generation, or is a lost generation. Do you think this opinion is shared by similar groups in the US?
Yeah.
What can you say to Ukrainian youth who are spending some of their formative years during the Russian war?
They understand something deeply that a lot of people in the West, including myself, don't. And yeah, that is the effects of war. And going also back to your previous question as well. 'Cause I know I gave a bit of a curt response. A lot of I've had this conversation with a lot of people. They see our generation as lost, so misguided. TikTok generation. And I just think that it's taking this look at all of us and underestimating our ability. And it's the same crime that you were inflicted. I don't think it's fair to continue that generational cycle while we have access to history and access to people that understand it. I think it hinders progress. Not only that, but it's also a massive overgeneralization. If you are saying that this generation's lost because you disagree with them, which is mostly it's like that ad hominem attitude. I bet you could find a young person that agrees with you. You just probably won't find them on whatever you're looking at on social media. Talk to us. We want to talk to you. Yeah.
Fear of growing up resonates with one of the audience members a lot. In your opinion, how can you fight this feeling or kind of deal with the fear of growing up?
Can't fight it. You can use it. We're not fighting tangibles this time, which is tough. It's really tough. We're fighting these very nebulous ideas like climate change, some cases authoritarianism, which is also on the rise across the world. Fighting these complicated economic systems. We're the ones that are getting the pitfalls of these strange, almost intellectual feeling problems. And with complication, and when reality meets complication, there's unknowingness and fear. I feel it every day. We can use it though. We can use it, and I think thereby overcoming it in a lot of ways, or at least overcoming pitfalls of it by getting out there and acting. Not just acting like I do, but getting out there and taking a role in your community, being the change that you want to see, at least in your community. And I think doing it in a way that doesn't ostracize other generations from helping us. But yeah, I understand that fear. I don't know if it's going away anytime soon. I hope only that our children will never have to feel it. And that we can be looking back at this moment in history and knowing we did the right thing. And the people above us can leave a legacy of doing the right thing.
What important principles and values do you follow when engaging with youth and social media influencers?
I don't know if this counts as a value, but I certainly try to use my empathetic muscle as much as possible. Understand where they're coming from, understand their viewpoints, being willing to listen to that. I don't expect anyone to listen to me that I wouldn't be willing to listen to, and not just hear, actively listen to. So yeah, I think that the main muscle I use is my empathetic muscle, and I think it's also one that my generation has in such strength. You can see in the way that we look at world issues with a more complex lens. That complexity that I think, and again, this is looking at it with blurry eyes, but that complexity that seems to be endemic to my generation's understanding of global issues, I think it has I think it's a result of a strong empathetic muscle. It's a result of an empathetic urge to understand more, because it takes effort to understand things in a more complex way.
You have imagined or dreamed of all that you have accomplished now in five years ago?
No. I could have, imagine. I could have dreamed it, maybe. I don't know about imagine. The way that dreams don't even seem to make sense sometimes. At times I do think that I'll wake up from this dream and I have to just do everything I absolutely can before I do. It was a long time that I was asking myself why I was here. Why did I get this role? And I worked really hard for it. I worked my whole life to be where I am, at least in acting. Literally, I started when I was 2. But still, there's that question of why comes upon you. And I realized it's not. I was asking myself the wrong question. Actually, my friend told me this. I was asking myself why when I should be asking myself what. Not why am I here? What am I going to do with it? Here I am, trying to do something with it.
How do you celebrate the highlights of your professional and personal journey that have influenced you as a youth leader and artist?
Oh, well, the aspects that have influence to me. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I do celebrate the achievements that I have with. I don't think I need a celebration. I think getting things accomplished has been a celebration enough for me. I'm not a huge let's go out and celebrate kind of guy, although I'm all for it. That was a joke I had at one point. If a big company decides to do the right thing and throw a party about it, I'm not going to be mad that they were doing the wrong thing for so long. I'm going to buy them a bottle. I'm only 20, so I guess the bottle is sparkling water. I'm not against encouraging. Yeah, that's what it is, isn't it? Celebrations are meant as a tool to encourage. And I think people celebrate things when they want to encourage themselves to do more of that thing. That smarter part of their brain knows. I don't know why the smarter part is back here. I don't think smarter part of the brain knows that you should be doing something, but the rest of the brain may not know that you should be doing it. You want to reward that area of the brain by celebrating and attaching the two things in almost a Pavlovian way. I don't know if I need that just yet. The things that I've done have been a reward in themselves. I don't need to encourage myself to do them because I already want to do them. Every step of the way, I want to do them. Every step of the way, I want to implement people with more questions. I want to unite people. I want to talk to more people and learn more things. In terms of acting, every single role is a gift. I get to be another person, explore that other person, interact with other people as that person, understand a different viewpoint to the most extreme and beautiful way you ever could. All of that, the rewards in themselves.
Last question. In your opinion, as we look to the future generation, what are the new opportunities that you think will be presented for this generation? Either could be in the development of technology and social media or other areas.
I see so much opportunity. I see opportunity in a way of unity that we've never experienced before as a race. And I know that sounds a little hippy dippy, but I think it's true. I see, if we're talking about that future generation, we're talking about a hypothetical scenario in which we responded well to these crises, which means we have precedent to respond well to all worldwide crises. It means we figured it out to a whole new level, and we can all relish in that. I know instead of the Romans, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? Some people might get that joke. Instead of the Romans, some generations, a lot is asked, others, a lot is given. I'm really hoping that this next one, there will be a lot given. A lot. Anything that we're setting the groundwork for now.
Thank you so much, Alex, for the great insights and candid perspectives. I'll turn now back to Dr. Durbak to close out.
Dr. Durbak.
Hello, Han. Thank you very, very much for a wonderful presentation. And I know that the people that were listening to, particularly the students that were involved with, were very, very happy to see you and to listen to you and to hear you. I have 3 questions to ask you. Well, first of all, you mentioned to me that you're a nerd. As a nerd, you probably read the Constitution, and if not completely, you are aware of the fact that our founding fathers emphasized the importance of understanding our Constitution in order to keep our freedoms and our prosperity. Now, freedoms and prosperity does not basically mean political correctness. It means the ability to be able to do what you need to do to keep the philosophy that you believe in. So what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, in terms of the Constitution, right? And I think you're referencing the whole document, but mainly the preamble, where it states the kind of philosophical roots of the whole thing.
Right.
Like, what is it? We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, something, something, something. Do ordain and establish this Constitution. Yeah, yeah, and I think it's actually interesting historical precedent as well in terms of whether or not you know, protecting these freedoms that are outlined in the Constitution takes form as political correctness. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And I think that's an important understanding as well, is that sometimes political correctness can be very helpful, and at times it couldn't be. And I think following it like a doctrine, certainly there arises some problems with that for sure. And the Constitution is another interesting document as well, though. I mean, you look at these philosophically rooted organizational governmental documents, and you have to really understand where they came from, the era in which they live. In terms of American history, it was to follow the Articles of Confederation, right? We already had a system that kind of loosely put these states together. At the time, you would say that, I wouldn't say that I'm American, I would say I'm a New Yorker, or like a Virginian would say I'm a Virginian, right? The Constitution was an effort to kind of put us all under one umbrella, and to really establish us as a unified country, which also the War of 1812 really helped as well. So it's interesting when reading at least the first bits of the Constitution, and I'm understanding how can we basically take all these little pieces that all vehemently disagree with each other and unify them under something we can all agree with. And I think that's why the Constitution so beautifully as well, and maybe I'll eat my foot later for saying this, errs on the side of gridlock rather than fluidity. I think all these governmental doctrines have to walk that line, whether or not they would rather have gridlock in some cases or more fluidity, which could be taken advantage of and turned authoritarian. And I see it as this compromise that just said we'd rather get less done than more done. That's why I think the message that I'm trying to get out there is so important, because our institutions were built on a system that it wanted to get less done and actually I do think it's a good thing. It tried to get less done in terms of to try to protect the institution itself, right? So the only way we can get things done is by universal approval, not universal, but near universal approval of thought, right? When it comes to stuff like climate change, we're battling really big figures that are trying to make sure that a big part of the populace either doesn't believe in it or doesn't believe that it's worth being acted upon. And sometimes they take advantage of personal tragedy to do that. I brought up West Virginia, for example. You know, a lot of their job loss was well before we even cared about climate change. It was just that, and actually coal production, I believe, peaked in like 2019. It was just that it got automated. So yeah, I think the Constitution is a really interesting example. And if you look at our governmental documents, you understand the need for not just shouting at one another, but for true unity.
Okay, a very good answer and thoughtful and understanding. Second question is, you know that the medical community is projecting that because of the advances in medicine, advances in treatments, we will be living, at least your generation will be living 30 years longer than actually is projected to. Have you thought about that? How would you feel if you lived till the age, let's say, of 120?
I really got to get better at my mahjong skills. Uh, um, yeah, I know it's a really interesting question because also around the West, birth rates are going down. We have these stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 societies of birth rate versus death rate as population increases. And now we are looking, and especially in places like Japan, we're looking at stage 5, where all of a sudden birth rates are going down, which could be a good thing in some senses, but in terms of economic growth, it could be scary as well. You're looking at a place like China where they're going to have a massive amount of population in retirement and quite a small generation to follow, and you could see how there could be instability there. One of the answers to that would be immigration. Again, I'm not an economist, but it would be immigration. And I know that's also controversial right now, and there's societal factors in that. My generation living older and older, all the generations are going to start living older and older, and there's going to be less and less young people. Other places in the world, they're still increasing in population. Most of the world's increase in population has been from South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. It's going to be an interesting demographic shift. I'm not sure if that's the direction you were expecting with that answer, but there's going to be definitely an interesting societal and demographic shift. We need to start setting up institutions that protect our elderly, so that people are not left out of the fold when they reach a certain age. And we need to make sure that the efficiency of the economy is directed towards everyone. That way we can share that wealth and hopefully support our older generation. It's not a new idea. Social Security has been around forever.
What is your feeling and what is your perception of the effect of artificial intelligence, AI, and basically using AI for the progress of what we're doing? Are you fearful of it? Do you think that this is the best thing that could happen? What are your thoughts on it?
There are parts I fear. One being large-scale job loss, or at least a large-scale shift in the job market that our education resources can't keep up with, and social unrest that may come from that. When people are out of a job, generally governments are about to be out of a job. In terms of excitement, the sheer innovation aspect is really interesting. We might have an economy that starts to more and more run itself. What does that mean? It means that maybe we can find a way of reallocating wealth. I know universal basic income is one of the solutions. I don't want to get political with it at all. But I think the mere prospect of innovation is very exciting. And this has also been my doomer. If I was a doomer, which I'm not a doomer, I'm a zoomer, would be right. I would be applying the last answer with this one. Maybe it's that artificial intelligence is such a simple idea. Look at the math, actually not crazily complicated. I mean, the main thing is backpropagation, which basically relies on differential equations. We've known about it for a while. We've just never really had the computing power. And there's a bunch of other things. You get these LSTMs and then the attention nodes. I don't know. I can really get into the nerd stuff. But the thing is that artificial intelligence, quite simple idea. And I'm not a doomer. I don't want to believe this, but it is out there that what if by the time a civilization got this advanced, that it's artificial intelligence that is its undoing, or maybe, as Elon Musk put it, we are simply a little line of code, a bootloader, to load up artificial intelligence, a much more efficient form of life. I don't want to think about it like that. I think every single generation thinks this next thing is going to kill them. I would like to think about it as bringing us to utopia, or at least a utopia from us. I'm sure that civilization will have its own problems, and we'll be talking about them then on another webinar, long time from now.
That is true. So, Alex, thank you very, very much for a wonderful presentation. And Susie, thank you for your moderation, as usual. And I wish you a very, very good week, a wonderful day, and a fantastic future. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Durbak. Thank you, Dr. Durbak. Thank you, Susie. And thank you for everyone that listened to me. Seriously, it means a lot.
Thank you.